Hi, my name is Chris, and this is my wife Natalie, and we're here to share our experience with NFP. If you've never heard about it, I wouldn't worry. We're going to tell you everything you need to know in a short window of time, and then we'll get into some of the more high-level reasons behind it, and then also the technical details of how exactly it works.
Absolutely. All right, so we are here really to just propose to you guys that NFP or natural family planning is a natural and a moral alternative to contraception. We're not really trying to convince you guys that this is going to be the right fit for you, but we do want to just share our positive experience that we've had with using NFP, and hopefully it'll be a little intriguing for you guys. So, just in general, just so you know, if you've never heard of natural family planning, NFP is a term for any number of different methods that teach women how to track their fertility, to naturally avoid or achieve pregnancy, or to monitor a woman's health. So you're not taking anything, doing anything, intervening in any way to, let's say, avoid pregnancy. You're just tracking when you're fertile, when you're infertile. And for example, if a couple is trying to avoid pregnancy, they would abstain on those fertile days. And if a couple is trying to obviously to achieve pregnancy, then you would plan for intercourse during those fertile days to achieve pregnancy.
We always like to point out that Natalie is a certified fertility care practitioner of the Creighton model system, and she teaches natural family planning to couples. So the reason we point that out is that sometimes after people see this presentation, they want Natalie to teach them how to use the Creighton model specifically. But the main thing that we're here to do is just explain our journey and how we ultimately settled on using the Creighton model ourselves. The only disclosures that I have is that I enjoy beer and I occasionally drink scotch after dinner. So I haven't had scotch before this presentation, so I
This
should
is
be.
it's 10 a.m. for us right
Yes.
now, so it's not that big of a victory. So first, just my experience, why I became passionate about NFP and then eventually became an instructor, and I teach other couples how to use a natural method. So just as a background, I was raised in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and then I moved to Helena, Montana for college. And after that, I lived in Hillsboro, Oregon. When I went to physical therapy school, I got my doctorate in physical therapy, and I work in orthopedics and women's health right now. And then we lived in Redmond, Oregon when I did loan repayment for my physical therapy school, working for Indian Health Service. The reason why I want to just show you guys these different places that I've lived is that this was 4 different healthcare systems that I was seeking care in. And
Just keep going.
there's our toddler. In each of these places, it was recommended for me to use birth control. So she's getting a snack right now.
This is Ellie. Can you say hi, Ellie?
Hi.
Say hi.
Okay,
She
there's your
wants
snack.
that.
Okay, so when I was in Coeur d'Alene, when I was a teenager, it was recommended to me that I could just get on birth control because I was having teenage acne. And then when I was in Helena, Montana, it was recommended because I was having kind of irregular cycles. And then in Hillsboro, that was when I was planning on getting married, and a doctor at school insisted that I couldn't get vaccinated unless I was on birth control, which is not true. And then eventually in Redmond, that was after having our first baby, whom you just saw. And it was in the hospital that, they really don't want you to leave the hospital without telling them that you're going to use some form of birth control after. So go ahead and move forward. I understand that these doctors had good intentions, but I was getting recommended birth control as an overall healthy female, typically having regular cycles, and most importantly, vocalizing that I didn't want to use contraception, and it was kind of being presented as the only option and all women use it. And I just didn't think that was true, and I didn't accept that. So I want you guys to know that we appreciate that natural family planning is countercultural. You're going to definitely come up against resistance at different times. But as Pope Benedict XVI said, the world offers you comfort, but you were not made for comfort. You were made for greatness. And 7 years ago, when we sat in the same seats that you guys are sitting at an engaged encounter, we were preparing for a sacramental marriage in the Catholic Church. And we knew we didn't want just an average marriage. We wanted a great marriage. And that caused us to start questioning a lot of these recommendations we'd been given, and really to seek an option that was going to be the best for us, spiritually, physically, and emotionally. And that is how we eventually settled on natural family planning.
So, talking about my experience, when I was in 4th grade, I got invited over to a friend's house for a birthday party, and he had an older brother that was in high school or college at the time. And I remember at this particular birthday celebration, at one point, one of the boys in my class had like snuck off, and there was kind of like a bunch of secrecy and everything, and other boys were like going over to this bedroom, and we snuck into this older boy's bedroom, and one of the kids pulled out a Playboy magazine that belonged to the older brother. And so that was the first time that I had seen a woman as an object. And I was in fourth grade, which is, I don't know, 11 or 12 years old. And I had never really talked about this. It wasn't at the time, I mean, I remember being kind of like very intrigued, but also confused. And I definitely didn't go home and tell my parents about this. But I come to find out when we were now being married, and this is, almost 20 years ago that this experience happened, I realized that the average age in our world today that a male is experienced or is exposed to porn is 12 years old. You can look that up. It's a crazy statistic. And that is almost exactly my truth and my experience. And the thing that's crazy about that is that as a 12-year-old, before I even had like the talk with my parents, my friends and my environment was teaching me that women were objects to be used for our satisfaction. And again, I didn't understand all this at that age, but it was the gateway into what a lot of men experience and end up struggling with for the rest of their life.
That was before your parents had given you any sex talk and you were already being formed. Okay, so we want to also be really transparent with you guys. Instead of just talking about all the highlights of using natural family planning, we want to talk about what our biggest concerns were. And we had two really big concerns at the start before we were really putting this into practice. And when we were choosing to not use contraception, we felt like we were going to be losing some freedom, and we thought we'd be sacrificing some effectiveness. So first, let's start by talking about freedom. We have a little video to illustrate our point here.
So this is our little Ellie, who you just saw. And this is a typical nap time or bedtime routine for her. We put her to bed, and she gets out of her bed and turns the lights on and begins playing with her dolls.
So because of that, we have a rule in our house now that we've set for her. And almost every night we have to put her in bed and say to her, now you need to stay in bed. You are not allowed to climb out of your bed, right? Of course, as loving parents, we try to explain to her why we have this rule, that it's really important to stay in bed because if she gets up and she plays during bedtime, sneaks downstairs to eat goldfish, colors on the walls, takes all the heads off of her Barbies, you get the picture, all the fun stuff that she does while she's supposed to be sleeping. We know she's going to be really miserable the next day, but to her, she still struggles with following this rule because it feels like she's losing her freedom to do what she wants and to make these choices for herself, right? And we can see, once again, as her loving parents, that we want her to practice this discipline of getting good sleep because it's actually far better for her the next day to be able to play and be free to enjoy her day without being cranky, feeling rested, feeling much better. But it comes from a certain level of discipline that sometimes is difficult and is seen as a loss of freedom. And the more that I parent, the more I've grown to appreciate probably what God must feel when he observes us make choices, right? And it probably is pretty close to what our Heavenly Father thinks when he sees us. He's like, okay, I'm giving you this freedom. Why are you doing that with your freedom, right? So when Chris and I got married and started using natural family planning, or NFP, we sort of felt like we were just trying to follow this arbitrary rule that the church had set for us. And it took some time for us to appreciate that it's really built, this moral law is really built on natural law, right? So for Chris and I, we choose to eat well, we exercise, we try to exercise every day. We try to always prioritize getting good sleep. We go to work, we pay our bills, we do all these things that require discipline and require effort when we don't have to. We have the free will to eat junk food all day, to drink alcohol, to stay up late, but we are not free from the consequences of those choices, of feeling sick the next day, of just feeling unwell, right? And that is really the summary of natural law. We have those natural consequences to help us make good decisions. And we found that by being disciplined, by eating well, by exercising, we have more freedom to be able to go on a hike or go on a walk with our kids, or to feel good and be able to get up and feel rested in the morning and to be able to enjoy our day more. And it's built on making those difficult choices and saying no to other tempting things, right? So bringing this back to NFP, we choose to use a form of family planning that for sure requires more discipline and more effort than maybe some other options, right? But we've grown to really appreciate that there's a lot of freedom that comes from not worrying about side effects of contraception, of feeling more spiritually connected and mutually committed to our vision of what our family life should be. And this is important too, in knowing that we are each capable of abstinence when it's required of us. And to be sure, abstinence is required of all married couples, whether you're using contraception or not. And we can choose to pout or be resentful. We can turn to porn or other means of pleasure or satisfaction. Or we can show up each day with discipline and effort and get to enjoy the freedom that comes from making these hard choices every day that point us towards the life and the marriage that we know we want to have. And that's what we've found true freedom in.
When we were deciding what method to use for family planning, I had heard of natural family planning. My parents had used natural family planning, and I had just kind of this preconceived notion that natural family planning is just not as effective as contraception is, which is a fear that we had coming in, and I know that a lot of people fear. Let's take this chart here. We have an X and Y axis. So on the X axis, we're going to talk about or rank these various family planning methods from the left side of the X axis, which is least invasive, to the right side, which is most invasive. And then on the scale, on the Y axis, we have the most effective at the top and the least effective at the bottom. So if you take the most common family planning methods out there, we have a condom, birth control pill, an IUD, sterilization, the rhythm method, which is a old school version of natural family planning that most people think of when they hear that word, the withdrawal method, and then fertility awareness, which are more modern, scientifically based family planning methods. So if you take these various methods of family planning and you chart them on this graph that I just showed you, you can take something like a condom, which is not that invasive, but actually is not that effective. And for typical use of a condom, it's actually only 79% effective at avoiding pregnancy, which a lot of people don't realize. I think in our culture, we think that condoms are this magical way to avoid pregnancy, but it's actually only 8 out of 10 times is that actually going to work for you. And then you have something like the birth control pill, which is a little more invasive because you're actually ingesting a hormone into the woman's body, and it's changing your cycle and the chemicals that are in your body. So obviously you get a little bit more effectiveness than a condom, but you're starting to go up that scale of more invasive. And most people also are not aware that birth control pills are not 100% effective. They're actually only, again, in typical use, 91% effective at avoiding pregnancy. And then you have something like the IUD, which is much, much more effective. But now we're talking about a very invasive, it's actually like a minor surgery of implanting and then removing the IUD. And there's also much, much more serious side effects associated with that. So you kind of have this trade-off, as you can see, condom, birth control, IUD. As you get more effective, typically things become more invasive. And then you have sterilization, which is the most effective, but also just a full-on surgery to either completely stop or remove your reproductive organs, which, as you can imagine, has a whole series of other side effects that can negatively impact you later in life. And then going back to the withdrawal method, which some people think of as a more natural method, that is actually only 78% effective at avoiding pregnancy. And then the fertility awareness-based method, which is the one that we use, is non-invasive at all. It has no medical side effects.
So you're just observing your fertility.
Right. And the thing that's crazy is that if you look at the chart that the CDC provides, these are where I'm getting all these percentages that I'm reading to you. You can see that down in the bottom left here, they are saying that the fertility awareness-based methods are only 76% effective, or as they're listing it, 24% effectiveness or failure rate.
Yeah.
So 76% effective at avoiding pregnancy. But you go over and look at their definition of what a fertility awareness-based method is, and they're saying that it's the standard days method, which is not modern. It is the rhythm method
yeah.
of natural family planning. So the fertility awareness-based methods that we use are, what are the statistics on the typical use of that?
With any of the methods, it's going to range from about 91% to 99% effective, which is actually very comparable with much more invasive methods of family planning, like using a birth control pill.
And then you jump over, this particular thing was the deal maker for us, but when we first got married, we were in a time of our life where we were definitely more interested in avoiding pregnancy, but at some point in every relationship, I would say for almost all people, you reach a point where you want to achieve. And so the interesting thing to think about is, now let's change this graph to the least effective and most effective at achieving pregnancy. So again, you have all these methods that are not effective at all at achieving pregnancy because by their nature, their sole purpose is to prevent pregnancy. Whereas fertility awareness, you can be using it to avoid pregnancy for months and months and months or even years, and then suddenly decide, because of prayerfully discerning or your job situation changing or a number of different factors, that you decide next month you want to achieve pregnancy, and you're going to have the highest chance of actually doing that using something like a fertility awareness-based method. So that's the other side that people usually avoid thinking about is, yeah, right now we want to avoid pregnancy. What are the methods out there to help us do that? And is this method that we are choosing going to ultimately help us achieve pregnancy when we want to?
All right, so we've talked quite a bit about our personal reasons for learning and continuing to use NFP, but when we were getting married, we actually knew very little, I would say, about the church's teaching about contraception. And we were just basically aware that the church taught that NFP was an alternative. So for us, it was kind of like checking a box that we were going to use it. Over the last few years, though, we've really become students of the theology on this topic, and it's actually very, very robust. So if you think that you're having some doubt or some question or some thought about the church teaching and no one else has addressed this, you probably just haven't looked at what's out there, because there's a lot out there. So we personally started studying the theology of the body, and this is an amazing collection of teachings from Pope John Paul II, and it primarily addresses the fact that Jesus was a man and had a human body and walked on this earth, and that God has lived this unique experience of humanity, of being human on this earth. And any effort to vilify the body as the enemy of the soul is just wrong, right? We are body and we are soul. And our bodily desires come from a real desire to be intimate with God in heaven. And so to summarize, St. John Paul was saying that there's a growing concern in the church that we're simply just creating this list of moral no's. And some of these we're telling married couples, right? There's a million different ways that someone could violate the church's teaching on sexual morality. But why are we framing it that way? The theology of the body really teaches us that our sexuality is really an amazing way that we can participate in God's plan for our marriage and focus on that yes that we get to say to each other instead of all of the no's and the rules, right? So for us, we really appreciate this teaching, and we know that every single sexual act is actually a renewal of our sacramental vows, and we commit to each other to selflessly love. For Chris and I, that has made us realize that there's this absolutely awesome power that we have to co-create new life with God. So what do we mean by that? Our physical intimacy creates a new body, right? And God creates this new eternal soul with that physical body, right? So he's inviting us to actively participate in our vocation and open up our marriage to his will. And that's how we create. That's how we co-create with him. But I also want to make sure that we're conveying, while we're talking about the importance of the life-giving nature of sex that the church teaches, it's not always about procreation, right? So the Catechism teaches us that there are very valid times in a couple's marriage where it actually may be irresponsible to try to conceive. And in this case, for the sake of what's referred to as responsible parenthood, that couple actually needs to have an effective way to avoid pregnancy. By the way, though, not all methods of avoiding pregnancy are created equal, and that's part of what this teaching is about. So, women are actually only fertile for a few days in their cycle. And so, like I mentioned in the beginning, when a couple is choosing to use NFP, they would abstain during these fertile days if they're trying to avoid pregnancy. So, you're not intervening in any way or trying to circumvent fertility. And ideally, that couple is choosing another way to be life-giving during that time. And it's a real sacrifice that they're making, saying, so for Chris and I, we're giving over a possibly selfish desire for physical intimacy if we know that that desire actually is violating this greater desire that God has for our vocation and for our family. So when we're working against him in our family, we're sacrificing a lot of that intimacy and closeness that ultimately is our greater goal than just any one sexual act. So do you want to go over some resources?
Yeah, so some big resources that we would highly recommend are the first and easiest. I'm a big fan of podcasts, super easy. Everyone has very easy access to that on the go. But Ask Christopher West is a podcast that Christopher West does with his wife, Wendy. And they answer questions submitted by the listeners, ranging variety of topics from parenting, sex, theology of the body,
single people,
porn, a whole slew of topics.
Yes.
And then if you also look up Christopher West on YouTube, he has some great content that they're putting out very regularly. The other great one is Green Sex by Jason Everett. That's about a 60-minute video that you can watch online. The Good News About Sex and Marriage is a book written by Christopher West that's a Q&A style, and that is a very, very interesting one that has a lot of very honest questions from married couples that he addresses in paragraph form. And then Humana Vitae is an article written by Pope Paul VI, and this was 50 years ago that he wrote this, and it was his calling to arms, I guess you could say, all of the men of science and women of science in the world to come and address the issue that he saw coming with needing a more effective method of avoiding pregnancy that was still in line with the church's teaching. So that's a really interesting one. And then finally, The Theology of the Body, the actual book written by St. John Paul. And then on the right here, we have a number of different websites. This is a screenshot of the Lilac and Rose blog, which is actually Natalie's website, where she has taken many hours of her day in recent past to just sit down and write her own experiences that she hears from working with all these different couples. And then in addition to that, she also is a women's health physical therapist, and so she has a whole different perspective on all the different issues that women are facing with their and working through with their own bodies, their marriages, and then the reproductive cycle and all that. And then this is a picture of the marriage and family life for the Archdiocese of Portland, and then naturalwomanhood.org and facts about fertility. But other than that, we would encourage you to take your questions that you have, go look up those answers. If you have, or if you're interested, you can always send questions to Natalie.
Hopefully we can answer specific questions if you have them, or just direct you to other resources if that's what you're interested in. So thank you so much for listening, and hopefully we stirred up some sort of questioning in you to learn more about natural family planning.